So this is not Hamaspik Lo Avdei Hashem, but it's a similar thought from the Rambam's son, Rabbi Avraham. Before I tell you that, there was a class from Arav Peretz they gave this week, and one of my friends was in the class and sent me a paraphrased wording of what Arav Peretz said. He translated into English, I translated back into Hebrew. I did post it, but I would like to just read it to you.
Is that the one I saw?
Yes. Okay. Those of you who don't have Facebook, now is when you should be feeling left out. It said, when Kadosh Baruch Hu told Avraham about what he planned to do to Sodom, what did Avraham do? He questioned the Kadosh Baruch Hu harshly. Said Avraham, a created being, interrogated the Creator in order to clarify the matter. From here I learned, this is Rabbi Peretz speaking, how important it is to investigate the truth for yourself, no matter the source. And yet today, if a gadol says something, everyone just accepts it. And if a person doesn't accept it, then they disgrace him. Who are you to argue with the gedolim, with the big rabbis? This is a common thing. Rabbi Avraham ben Rambam himself writes something similar, and I'm just pulling it up here on my phone. It's amazing what your phone could do today. People say your phone could do so many avirot, and they're not wrong, but your phone can also do so many mitzvot. It depends on the person using the phone. Says Rabbeinu Avraham ben Rambam. Actually, this letter was so controversial that there are some sages who struggled with it so much that they had to say that the Rambam's son forged this article. I mean, it wasn't written by him. It was forged as if it was written in his name. It can't be true that he would write such a thing. But if you know the style of the Rambam, and especially of his son, you realize that every word in this is said by Rabbeinu Avraham ben Rambam. You might not like the things that come out of the Rambam's family, but they definitely said things like this. Rabbeinu Avraham says, know that it is your duty to understand that whoever propounds a certain theory or idea and expects that theory or idea to be accepted merely out of respect for the author without proving its truth and reasonableness, so they want you to accept what they're saying because of who they are or because of who they're quoting said it, pursues a wrong method prohibited by both the Torah and human intelligence. And it goes on to say that in the Torah we have a commandment that when you come to judgment, you don't judge someone based on if they're wealthy or if they're poor. You don't judge them based on who they are, but rather what is it that they're saying. Does it hold water in a court of law? It says Rabbeinu Avraham, the Torah demands from you, when you read things in books, you hear things in classes, you hear people say things, to not just say, oh, a famous person said it, it must be true, but rather to say, what is behind what they said? Do they truly know what they're talking about? Are there sources, are there proofs for the things which they said? When I wrote my book, it was very important for me to source as much as I could, even things that argue with me, but to make sure that I gave sources for everything. The reason being, nobody should ever trust me because I said something. And if I can show you this opinion, this logic, this idea, that gives validity to the things that are said. About 3 days before Pesach last year, I got an email from a famous rabbi who said, Rabbi Yonatan, I met him in person once in my life. Rabbi Yonatan, I heard one of your classes, and everything you said about the laws of Passover is incorrect. It's like, hi, good morning to you. I don't know where it got. It's an email came out of nowhere. I don't email this person. I don't know where it came from.
Nice to know your work is appreciated.
Well, yeah, I'm glad. I was glad to hear that he heard it.
Took you months.
I'm glad.
All publicity is good publicity.
Right, and I wrote back to him. I said, dear Rabbi so-and-so, I'm sure that you're a great posek. You're greater than me for sure. I said, but I wrote a book with sources. And in order for you to argue with what I said, sending me an email is not enough. Please tell me where I'm wrong, and then tell me the halachic sources that would disagree with... I said, I didn't say anything in the book. Tell me the halachic sources which disagree with the halachic sources that I brought down in my book. And never heard back from the man.
Never responded.
It's true. What I said might go against what the Bubby taught to her kids in the kitchen, but that's not how halakha is determined. Halakha is determined by sources, by logic, by rationale, by what does the Shulchan Aruch say, what does the Rama say. Well, custom is a part of it, but it's not everything. And a person has to know, and not everything in the world you believe just because you heard it. Even now, when I shared with you this teaching from Rabbi Peretz, you must analyze everything and think about everything. There's a teaching that you're allowed to accept things from your rabbi, even if you don't know the source. Your rabbi told you this is the right way to do something. But you're not allowed to tell other people to follow that tradition that you have from your rabbi unless you can prove its source and its authenticity. So I'm allowed to do something because Rabbi Peretz told me to. But if I don't have a source, and there are many things that I do like this, and I just haven't yet reached his depth of his judgment or his understanding, and therefore I'm not able to tell other people to do these things. There are certain things that I do. I wouldn't tell other people to do them. But this, when I heard Rabbi Peretz say this in the class, I recalled what Rabbeinu Avraham ben Rambam said. So they're saying the same thing. And so now I'm able to tell you this idea. And this is an idea that perhaps makes the way we learn different than the way other people learn. We're not being critical. We're not disbelieving in our rabbis. We're saying we believe the Torah is so true that it stands up to the test of questions. It stands up to the test of, well, just tell me your source. Pull out your information. Where are you coming from?
Where did you get it?
Where did you get it from? Why do I have to believe it just because your rabbi said so? And anyone who's a little bit intelligent or sophisticated agrees. And the truth is that the Rambam and Maran and all the other rabbis in the world, they didn't want you to follow them. None of them would have walked around wanting you to follow them. They wanted you to reach the truth. And they would say, if you could tell them that the truth was otherwise, they would also say so. And it's not the only time. Many times in Halakha, we say, if Rabbi so-and-so would have seen this book, or he would have known this source, he would take back what he said. There are entire halachot that we do like that. And so this is
That's the difference between belief and really seeking knowledge.
Absolutely, but the rabbis who are seekers of knowledge didn't want you to believe in their books. They wanted you to learn them and to understand them.
Yeah, it's different now because I remember I studied some classes in Denver with a rabbi who ran the yeshiva there, and he said, whenever I'd ask a question, my rebbe said, be quiet, just learn. You know, you're never allowed to ask a question of them.
So I had the exact opposite experience.
That's good.
And I only discovered this approach of be quiet, don't ask questions, when I started teaching. Believe it or not, when I started teaching in different places, in Israel especially, but I was teaching, and I was telling people to question what I'm saying, they would sit there quiet. I'd say, what's wrong? We were taught not to question.
Right.
Or they would find that it made me look not confident in what I was teaching if I was asking them to think out loud with me. Then I realized that the system is damaged. It's damaged that we're teaching people to feel this way, think this way. And in most yeshivot, it's not the approach. I can't promise for all of them, but maybe not on a deep theological level. They don't appreciate questioning and why do we do this, or why do we dress that way, or why do you believe that? But in learning to be able to critique and analyze things, almost all the yeshivot agree. The problem that I found the most is especially when women learn Torah. I'm not saying this in a sexist fashion. It seems that the rabbis and the rebbitzins who educate women treat them as less intelligent beings than men. And it's an incorrect thing. It's like you'll find men's classes and women's classes. Men are always studying Talmud, and women are always baking cookies for Hanukkah. And you ask yourself, why is it split up that way? You have ladies today who are highly sophisticated. We're not talking about people who were barefoot and didn't know how to read and were running around the desert, right? We're talking about sophisticated, intelligent people of the year 2015. They have a right to learn Torah. They have a right to, I'm not sticking my head now between resolutions that came out recently. I'm not at all getting into this discussion about women rabbis. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about learning Torah. Torah was given to the entire Jewish people on Mount Sinai, ladies included. And they have a right, and not just a right, but an obligation to understand and know as much Torah as they can. What kind of family is it where a man is going to be knowledgeable in Torah and his wife is going to be a cave woman? It's a silly world. Or that she knows more about her career and her job and what she studied in university and nothing about her Judaism.
I think today people confuse being critical or looking things or looking for sources with ad hominem attacks.
Sure.
You know, it's like they can't separate the personal from the knowledge base. That's where a lot of the problem is coming from. Because it's like, you know, if we're sitting here saying, well, show me your source and all that, we have mutual respect for each other, right? Or you respect your teachers, I respect my teachers, even if I disagree with them.
Absolutely.
But a lot of times you also get people, oh, he knows nothing because of blah, blah. You know, it's like it becomes personal and it's about their own ego.
Well, it's also become to the point where you can't critique anything anymore
Yeah.
without suffering the consequence of you must hate them. That's why you're critiquing them.
Now, you remember all that, whenever we were trying to straighten somebody out about political versus spiritual,
Right,
and
and-
you got all this apikoros stuff.
Right, well, because that's a natural defense that a person throws out there.
But it's
How many times I hear, Rabbi, you are against a certain Jewish group because you criticize them so much. If I was against them, I would never mention anything about them. I don't speak about Mormons in my classes because I don't believe that they're relevant to the Jewish discussion or to any discussion in general. But I mention other groups of Jews that I argue and critique with because there are other things that I agree with them and I look up to them, and that's why I'm trying to keep them on their toes. But that's done the same thing to me, and that's normal. When you study in a system of Judaism which tells you, you always see rabbis writing letters to the other one and writing commentaries and criticisms on the other one. Our whole history is full of this. But today we've reached this modern idea of, it's not so modern, but it's been pushed very hard that you shouldn't, don't argue, just play nice, everyone.
But that's also political correctness, because behind the scenes, people still will feel a certain way.
Sure.
You know, that group,
Closet
their
racists.
Torah, or
Sure. I just had a discussion with somebody recently. And he told me that the reason he lives in a certain neighborhood is because no black people live there. I told him, are you a racist? No, God forbid. I said, so why did you just tell me that? Oh, because it's just quiet, it's in private. I said, so you're a closet racist, meaning you don't want to live somewhere where there are black people, but you would never say it in public. There are many people like that. That they'll,
I said,
because of political correctness, they won't say certain things, but if my daughter does X or my son does Y, then I'm going to blow up on them.
I sent you an article today from Tablet.
I also didn't get a chance to read that one.
It's about a woman who's Dati, who's observant, and she came out of a liberal democratic home, and then when she got into the Jewish community, well, this Republican right wing, and said that he's stuck in the middle, because on some things the Democrats are right, and some things the Republicans are right. So what is she supposed to do? She's issued.
Find yourself in the middle.
Right,
And the truth is not in the extremes, but this has been told to us many, many times.
right. And he said, mentioned her. What was the rabbi who wrote that book at Tzaddik in our time?
Rabbi Aryeh Levin is
Yeah.
the rabbi in the book. The one who wrote it is Rabbi Simcha Raz.
Right. So he says in that book that he forbid his students to join a political party.
There were many such rabbis. Though I'm not convinced that that's an intelligent decision. It's just, you can't pick sides completely. But at the end of the day, you have to make decisions. If you don't join any political party, then
Well, he also said
you
vote.
may. Okay, so then
Yeah.
that's a nice
You
balance
have to
too.
vote. Issue driven.
Rabbeinu Abraham's point, and I believe Abba Peltz's point, is that if Abraham Avinu could question HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're allowed to question anybody in the world. Respectfully. There's a book written by Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin. Who's Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin?
Mentioned him many times.
I mentioned him many times.
Yeah, he's the Graz.
Very good. The Graz main student.
main student.
Yeah, the Rav Chaim of Volozhin. Rav Chaim of Volozhin, believe it or not, being the Vilna Gaon's main student, was the first person to allow Hasidic students into the yeshiva of Volozhin. So as much as he was a student of the Vilna Gaon, he was already a generation afterwards when it came to thinking. Rav Chaim of Volozhin wrote a book called the Nefesh HaChaim, the Soul of Chaim. He wrote this book because he didn't want anyone to study, I'm just paraphrasing, the heretical works of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. He didn't want anyone to study the evil book called the Tanya. Ended up writing, it's a funny thing, right? He ended up writing the same exact book, just in a completely different angle. He said, if they're already studying Kabbalah, so then I need to teach them the real Kabbalah. And they end up, I've actually learned both, and the only way I truly understood the Tanya was by reading the Nefesh HaChaim along with it. And the only way I truly understood the Nefesh HaChaim is by reading the Tanya along with it. The two books that complement each other very well, though there are minor details that are disagreed upon, but it seems like HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't want that fight to last so long. He wrote a second book called the Ruach Chaim, the Wind of Chaim, the Spirit of Chaim. And this is a commentary in Pirkei Avot. And in Pirkei Avot it tells us that one should respect Torah scholars, V'hevei mit'abek be'afar raglehem, and you should roll over in the dust of their feet. It says such a thing. The same one says that you should be careful from their bite and be all kinds of. It's a famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. And most people understand this to mean that you should be very subservient, very obedient to the Torah scholars. Rav Chaim of Volozhin disagreed with this concept. He said there's a law in the Talmud. The Talmud says that a student is not allowed to accept something from his teacher unless he agrees with it, or unless he can comprehend it. But if it goes against everything who he is, he's not allowed to accept a teaching from his teacher just based on faith.
That really harmed a lot of Balei Tshuva.
It harmed a lot of people, not just Balei Tshuva. The whole world is struggles because of this. The whole educational system today. Our rabbis taught us also. En ha-baishan lamed, that a shy person is not able to be a student. The ve'en ha-kabdan melamed, and a teacher cannot be too strict. There has to be this relationship of give or take, of argue, question, teach, but not educate, but to pass on a message and allow you to do what you need with it. They say that a great teacher is one who teaches someone how to read something, teaches someone to read, but not how to read it. Teaches someone to learn Shulchan Aruch, but not how to understand it. Gives them that freedom on how to do it. The reason I'm telling you this, Rav Chaim of Volozhin says, so what does it mean? Mitabek. Literally, the word mitabek is also used for struggle, for fighting. You remember, Vivater Yaakov levado. Vivater Yaakov levado, vayavek ish imo. Yaakov was left alone, and he was forced to struggle with another man. Who was that man?
An angel.
An angel of Esav, right?
Esav, right.
Yeah.
He struggles with that man. The word vayavik, it's the same word as dust of their feet, but it means to struggle. So Rav Chaim of Volozhin says veheve mitabek ba'afar regleihem. It doesn't mean and you should roll around at the dust of their feet, but you should struggle with them, argue with them, but respectfully, as the dust on their feet. Meaning, I'm sitting here as a student, I disagree with what you're saying, I need you to help me out to understand it. Respectfully, but don't accept things. This style of learning and teaching has not been lost, but it's been marginalized. And it's our job to bring it back to the table. And you'll be very surprised at what kind of truth and what beauty comes out in a world that is open to such discussion. There are teachers and there are students. But a student and a teacher, neither of them are absolute. A student is not an absolute sponge, and a teacher is not an absolute speaker. There has to be some dialogue between the two of them, a give and take. And actually, it's the Lubavitch Rebbe, who I once heard quoted as saying that it used to be that teachers had to speak 70% of the time and give their students 30% of a chance to speak. And he said that today, though, the model of education is teachers and schools should speak 30% of the time and allow their students 70% of the time to speak. Different generations, different understandings, to know who you're dealing with. If kids felt involved at school, they wouldn't dread coming to school the next day. I never dreaded going to one more class with Rabbi Beth. I didn't. I chose to be there. And I chose to be there because it gave me a certain freedom. And you should know, when I was here in San Diego, and I remember I was here for 9 months, I was stuck here, and then it was 2011, I believe. And I didn't know what to do. Should I go back to Israel? I couldn't go back to Israel, so should I go to Baltimore for 9 months? The thought of going back to a traditional American yeshiva, after having been exposed to the openness in Rabbi Peretz's yeshiva, I told my parents I might as well go back to prison. They said, but they said, hey, I'm not back. I was never there. But to go to, I said, but you were there already for 5 years. It's not like it's a foreign place to you. He says, when a baby's born, a baby lived great in its mother's womb for 9 months. But the moment it comes out, if someone were to try to put it back in, the baby would die. I was already born. I was already brought to a new experience that I could not go back to that place.
As Bob Dylan said about Lot's wife, don't look back.
Don't look back. And it's not because that system is a bad one, but the openness, that interaction with the students and teachers existed by our parents. And I forgive all the dysfunctionalities that the yeshiva in Israel had because of the Torah that was being brought out of there. And so perhaps the message from Rabbeinu Avraham ben Arambam is question. Don't just swallow everything that is told to you. And it's not just in Torah.
Ask a rabbi for a pasuk, can you argue with him?
Just like if you go to a doctor for healing and you argue with them, if you know what you're talking about, you should argue with them. If you don't know what they're talking about and you went to them because you don't know, so chances are you don't have much to argue with them about. But you're allowed to educate. I'll tell you, many times I would come ask Rabbi Peretz a question. And he would tell me, you're not ready to ask this question.
Wow.
And I would say, why not? He said, because you're an ignoramus. I said, what do you mean? He said, you're asking me, Rabbi, can I do X, Y, and Z? Or did you study the Rambam and then Rashi and then the Rif and the Rosh and the Ritva? And then get back to me. Once you know everything, I'll tell you which is the right opinion. And that was, what do you mean? I am asking you because I don't know. He said, you can do that when you're not a rabbi. He said, but you have an obligation now to know as much as you can, and then ask me for guidance through it. The same is true. You can educate yourself in the laws of Shabbat and say, but this is something I don't know about, so do I follow this opinion or that opinion, and then come to the rabbi? That would be a much higher level of learning. You're allowed to argue when you know.
Well, like I've seen with you, it's like you research an issue sometimes before you end up giving and get back to the person before giving them a paskin. It's as opposed to what you mentioned 2 Shabbats ago about pulling it out of your belly,
stomach.
which we have a less kind term.
Do you know who taught me this? Was Rashi.
Yes.
Rashi. The Talmud says, "Lamad leshoncha lomar eni yodea." Teach your tongue to say, "I don't know." Shema yitfesu b'cha, because they might catch you that you're lying. When did this happen to me? Somebody once told me they asked a rabbi why you're not allowed to dance on Shabbat. The rabbi didn't know the answer. He told them there was once a time, a true story, I'm not making up the story. There was once a time where somebody danced on Shabbat on top of a table, and the table broke, and the man broke his legs, and our rabbis decreed that you cannot dance anymore on Shabbat. And I'll tell you the truth, is the person after Shabbat, Rabbi, is that story true? What story are you talking about? So open up Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says the reason you can't dance on Shabbat is because people are very fluent in making musical instruments. Someone's going to make a guitar, someone's going to put some leather over a box and make drums. And it was a time where people were very handy with what they did. We were afraid that people were going to start playing music on Shabbat. The Rama argues that perhaps today nobody knows how to make their own musical instruments, and that maybe that's the reason why we dance on Shabbat. Or some would say that the shuffle around the bima is not really a dance, it's kind of a Jewish shuffle. Dancing is when you really get into it, which we don't normally do on Shabbat anyways. But this rabbi then came up looking not just like an ignoramus, but also as a liar. Why couldn't you just say, I don't know, I'll get back to you? The reason why a person feels like they can't say I don't know is because there's an ego involved. And not just an ego that's incorrect. In my experience as a rabbi, when I've said I don't know, there are 2 kinds of people. Those who say, wow, I appreciate the honesty, I'll wait for you to get back to me. And those who say, oh, if you're the rabbi, you don't know, why am I hiring you as the rabbi? There are such people. And those people are the reason why sometimes people find themselves lying. They'll make up stories. I've chosen to err on the side of Kasha. I'd rather you think I'm a rabbi who doesn't know anything, and I'll only speak the truth to you, than for me to always be making things up right and left. And I don't know everything in the world, but the things that I do know, I know. And the things I don't know, I'm happy to look into. And it's a good character trait that Rashi himself followed. Why did it? Because the Talmud, it's nice the Talmud says it. But Rabbi Akiva Eger brings, and I don't know the exact number, but maybe 130 times, where Rashi says, Eini yodea, I don't know what this means. I don't know what this verse means. And the point was, if Rashi can say, I don't know what something means, you can also say you don't know what something means. Because Rashi knew what everything meant. He is the commentator. And so if he doesn't know, we're also allowed to not know.